All right, we're about to get started. I'm gonna start moving the slides in a second. One more reminder as people join, make sure to close any other applications or windows you may have open for the best video and audio experience with Zoom today. All right, I'm gonna get started now. Welcome to today's webinar. We know your time is valuable and we appreciate you joining us, especially at the end of the year. Our session will begin shortly, but we'll cover a few housekeeping items before diving into our survey of RCV in 2022. First, due to the number of attendees we have today, we have put all participants in attendee mode, so you have no video or audio controls. You'll just be watching the presentation today. If you do have any comments, feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And if you experience any technical issues, message Rosemary Blizzard directly using that same chat feature. If you have any questions, you can submit them using the Q&A feature, also at the bottom of the screen, as shown on this slide. And if we don't get to your question today, we'll address that question in a document that we post along with a recording of the webinar that will go up on YouTube and on our website. We'll also have auto-generated captions available for the event, which you can activate by clicking on the Show Captions button, again, as shown on this slide on the bottom of the screen. It's worth noting that these are auto-generated, so they may not always be accurate, but we did want to provide them just in case. Finally, a recording of the event, that Q&A document that I mentioned, and other relevant materials will be posted on the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center website as soon as possible. Oops, that's my phone. For those that are not familiar with the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, we provide a compilation of best practices and firsthand experiences from jurisdictions that have used this method of voting with a focus on election administration. Our website, rcvresources.org, and other content have been developed as educational tools for election administrators, policymakers, voters, candidates, and anyone else who's interested in learning more about ranked choice voting. Today's presenters are Renee Rojas, Ryan Kirby, Kelly Sechrist, and me, Chris Hughes. Renee Rojas is presenting first. He is the program manager for RCTab, which is our RCV tabulation software. Before joining the Resource Center, he served as an election administrator in Benton County, Washington for almost a decade. Ryan Kirby is our public policy specialist and works closely with me on our policy research and legislative work. Ryan previously served as the chief of staff for State Senator Cheryl Kagan in the Maryland Senate, where he, among a number of issues, supported the senator's election legislation. Kelly Sechrist is the development director for the Resource Center. She oversees fundraising, development, and communications for Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. She has spent her career in the nonprofit sector as a volunteer, as a board member, and as a development staff member for nearly 30 years. And finally, I'm the director of policy and general counsel for the Resource Center. I've now spent the last 7 years learning how election administration and ranked choice voting interact and using that expertise to advise advocates, policymakers, and election administrators on how ranked choice voting will work for them. So without any further ado, let's get started with Renee.
Thanks for that, Chris. Sorry about that. I had a little difficulty there. Once again, my name is Renee Rojas, and I'll be discussing Alaska's experience implementing ranked choice voting. Alaska held its first ranked choice voting elections this year, and while there were some challenges, Alaska managed to successfully pull off not one, but 2 ranked choice voting elections in 1 year. In 2020, Alaskan voters approved ballot measure 2, which included the establishment of ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting in Alaska begins with a pick one primary and is followed by a ranked choice voting general election. Voters vote for one candidate in the primary, and only the top 4 vote getters will continue on to the general election ranked choice voting ballot. Alaska uses this method for the offices of president and vice president, U.S. senator, U.S. representative, governor and lieutenant governor, and all state representative and state senator positions. Alaska's first ranked choice voting election cycle began early this year with the vacancy left by the sudden passing of U.S. Representative Don Young. 48 candidates filed to fill the vacancy, with 44 eliminated by a special primary election held on June 11th. Fun fact, this was also Alaska's first statewide by mail election. Then, Alaska's first ranked choice voting general election took place on August 16th, where candidate Mary Pelatola won in the second round with 51.48% of the vote. Okay, next slide. With the primary and special general election out of the way, Alaska continued to conduct its regularly planned ranked choice voting elections in the November general election. Offices up for election included U.S. Senator, U.S. Representative, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, as well as state representative and state senator positions. What you're seeing on the screen here is a cropped image of a sample ballot from that election. And these sample ballots are available on the Alaska Division of Elections webpage and worth a look if you're curious about what a ranked choice voting ballot looks like or just ballot design. Next, we'll go over how the public responded to ranked choice voting over the last year in Alaska. The nonpartisan and nonprofit organization, Alaskans for Better Elections, commissioned exit polling of voters on how they felt about ranked choice voting and the changes made in 2020. Some highlights of that report are as follows. 79% of respondents reported ranked choice voting to be simple, while 59% said ranked choice voting was very simple, and only 9% said it was very difficult. 92% of respondents reported receiving some instruction on how to rank their ballots or rank their choices. And finally, 60% say Alaska's state and local elections were much more competitive when compared to previous years. If you'd like a more in-depth view of that data or the polling, a link to this poll will be included in this webinar's resources once it's posted to our website. Overall, admins found the process to be easier than expected. That's not to say there weren't lessons learned, but we'll cover that in the next slide. However, admins in Alaska were able to come up with a process that worked for Alaska and followed the same processes and procedures in the general election that they developed in August's special general election. Additionally, admins also took extra steps to educate their canvassing and certification board on ranked choice voting. They found it was important to make sure that the individuals certifying their election understood the process from voting to tabulation. The photos that you see presented here on the slide are of the State Review Board doing a hand count of Senate District E's ballots with candidate representatives present. Alaska's special general election went well and provided plenty of lessons and best practices that we can pull from that Alaska then implemented during the general election in November. Alaska's Division of Elections felt that focusing on voter education early in the process was invaluable. For example, the Division of Elections focused on tabulation early in the cycle, but decided to shift their education focus on how to mark the ballot as election day drew closer. Additionally, poll workers were educated in how to mark a ranked choice ballot, were invaluable as they could help voters new to the process right at the polling site, streamlining the whole process for voters. That was actually kind of a surprise that they found in the special general, and they went ahead and carried on to the November general. Procedurally, Alaska felt that they had a good grip on how to process ballots and tabulate. However, they felt that managing the size of their state and the centralization of tabulation could have been planned out slightly differently in the special general. And this kind of brings us to my last point here. Implementing ranked choice voting isn't impossible to implement properly. However, it can have its challenges, and it's important to treat each implication as a unique process while learning what we can from the experiences of other jurisdictions. Thank you.
Kelly Sechrist is our next presenter. I believe she's getting her video set up now. She'll be on in just a second.
Hey, everybody, sorry about that. Thank you, Chris and Renee. I know there's been a lot of national focus on Alaska, rightly so. It's our second statewide implementation of ranked choice voting, but there also have been some other first-time implementations as well as continuing use for RCV, both single winner and proportional RCV. So the three that were new this election cycle, first of all, at Albany, California, it's in Alameda County, which is no stranger to ranked choice voting, as you'll see in the next slide. But they are implemented a proportional ranked choice voting election for their city council and the Board of Education. We also had Corvallis, Oregon, in Benton County, Oregon, which again is no stranger to ranked choice voting. They are using single winner ranked choice voting elections for their local elections, the mayor's race and the city council races. This time they only had 2 of these to actually require ranked choice voting. The mayoral race had 3 candidates and 2 rounds of counting, and the Ward 9 city councilor had 3 candidates and 2 rounds of counting. Then finally, Palm Desert, California, in Riverside County, which has not implemented ranked choice voting before, used a proportional ranked choice voting for their District 2 elections. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Palm Desert and some of the things they did as a newly implementing ranked choice voting district. As for continued use, we have San Francisco, California, Berkeley, California, Oakland, California, and San Leandro, California, all who have been using ranked choice voting in a single winner format for a number of years. They're all located in the Bay Area. The 3 that are located also in Alameda County, as I mentioned before, Berkeley, Oakland, and San Leandro, and they use them for the various city offices. Tacoma Park, Maryland also has been using it for a while for its mayor and city council. It is also a single winner jurisdiction. Arden, Delaware uses a proportional ranked choice voting election to elect their 7-member board of assessors. They actually had 14 people run for these offices. They elected all 7 seats this time. And just kind of a fun fact, I love math and love to think about these things in figures. Arden's a really small town, about 428 people live there. And so 14 people running in the election for the 7 seats represents about 3% of their population. So that's a nice engagement number for their community. Portland, Maine has used ranked choice voting for school board this year. And in just a few minutes, Ryan's going to share some updates for Portland when he discusses ballot measures. They're going to be making some changes to how they do their proportional representation. And then finally, our other statewide implementer of ranked choice voting, Maine, actually only used it in 1 contest this year, the District 2 congressional seat. So let's talk about Palm Desert. They're an interesting case because they did not get to ranked choice voting the way many of our communities and jurisdictions are doing across the nation right now. They are the beneficiary of a remedy from the California Voting Rights Act, where they had a lawsuit that needed a remedy to help their community members elect a candidate of their choice. In Palm Desert, Riverside County administers the actual election, and so they handle all the things like the ballots and the machines and all the hands-on side, and Palm Desert was responsible for the voter education side. And we talked quite extensively with Anthony from Palm Desert, and one of the most important things was to help voters understand the new voting method. So a couple of things that they did, and they had a strong voter education plan in place and worked really hard to meet a lot of different people in a lot of different places with their education efforts. They had a website with information, some videos, those kinds of things, ranked choice voting flyers. You can see here on the right side of my screen is the back and front of one of the flyers that they created to help voters understand the proportional ranked choice voting that they were using to elect in District 2. They focused primarily on teaching people to mark the ballot. A lot of times we say around our work that voters have a couple questions, and one prior to the election, they're really interested in how to mark their ballot correctly. They want to know more about how it's tabulated down the road typically. Of course, there's some people that want to know right up front, but really making sure your voters know that ahead of time is helpful. They also found it helpful to explain to voters the California Voting Rights Act case. People that were not aware of the litigation, were not aware of the case, were sort of thinking, oh my goodness, why are we having to do this? Well, when they explained it to voters and helped them understand why the case came to be, they were able to understand it more carefully. They also use some design consultants, and I think that's something that can be a useful tool if you don't have a large staff of designers and people that have the expertise to create the communications pieces that you want for your education. Hiring a consulting firm can help with that. They did the citywide mailers, radio ads, social media buys, and the video explainer production. And that was one of the videos that they used on their website. They'll be doing this all over again because one of the most interesting things about Palm Desert is they're going to use both proportional representation, proportional ranked choice voting in District 2, and they'll use single winner ranked choice voting in District 1 as they elect a 5-person city council. So as Renee mentioned before, there's always lessons learned when you are working in elections. What are some things that we might do differently? What are some things that were positive? What do we want to continue forward? Couple things to think about. For voter education efforts, it's helpful to identify community groups that can help with the voter education and engage more different groups of voters. Sometimes that's your League of Women Voters. It might be your NAACP chapter, but to really gather those community groups together and have them help you distribute information can be a great way to get to more voters. As I mentioned before, helping voters understand why the jurisdiction is using proportional ranked choice voting, why there are 2 districts that use different kinds of ranked choice voting. Those all make the voters more comfortable with this new voting system that they're being asked to use, but when they understand the why. Also, adding signage to polling places for how to mark an RCV ballot can be very helpful for both poll workers as they get questions and for voters as they go into the polling place. They may or may not have had a chance to engage with the voter education materials, so having that available to them at the polling place can be helpful. Also, providing training to poll workers directly about proportional ranked choice voting as a voting method can help them answer the questions that voters may have and understand, what questions that they might be asked. So switching gears a little bit to a different community in California, I want to talk a little bit about San Francisco and some of the strengths of their elections are really in the results reporting and the transparency by which they share the tabulation process. They're very good communicators, very well, they do really well at communicating with their voters, and it's clear as I'll go through the process with you on how they do that. One of the things we know, they adopted quite a long time ago, 20 years ago, first used 18 years ago. I think you learn a lot of things in 18 years, and you learn about how to best communicate with your voters in your jurisdiction. They are all single winner contests, and the elections in this case, rather than being run by the county, are run by the city, where they use Dominion voting systems. So they do a couple of things on the front end of the election, and these are just a few of the things they do. I didn't have time to tell you all the wonderful things they do. They mail a voter guide, and it has all kinds of information in there. It has candidate information. It has information about, security of the equipment, many different things. I imagine it's pretty big, maybe like a telephone book. It had a lot of information in it. It's available online in a PDF format, and then it's actually mailed out to every voter. You can see the front of that front cover of the voter information pamphlet is on the right of the screen. They also have a website that has ranked choice voting information and election information, clear, easy to navigate, provides language assistance. They provide language assistance in 4 different languages automatically: Chinese, Spanish, Filipino, and English. But there also is a caveat or a offer on the website to help with other languages as necessary. Provide audio resources, large print for their voter education materials. That's helpful for folks with disability challenges. In November, San Francisco had 9 contests that allowed ranking. 2 of the contests had 3 candidates each, and each, interestingly, went to 3 rounds of counting to determine the winner. You can see on the right side of my screen the report for one of those contests. We'll be posting some resources and information for you after the webinar in our post-webinar information, so you can check these out firsthand and take a look at these yourself. And then 7 contests had a single round, but they only had 1 or 2 candidates running in the contest. Okay, so let's get to the part that really helps voters to understand and know what's going on. They have the Department of Elections in San Francisco has a really clear results timeline. They post that ahead of time. They make sure that voters know that, and they communicate well with the voters. On election night, they start providing daily unofficial round-by-round counts, and that is before all the ballots come in. So they're providing round-by-round counts the same way that you would provide election results from a plurality election, and they're using the method to go ahead and do the round-by-round as it changes each day. One of the other things I thought was a really interesting, if they don't have results on any given day, they actually put out a press release to help the public understand why there are no results coming in from that day. So they really are dedicated to daily communication with voters. They use multiple communications channels to put the results out into the public. Of course, their website, social media, local television. They want to make sure that voters have access to different kinds of communications that they may be using. For every contest, they have a short report and a detailed report, and that comes out with every set of unofficial round-by-round results. So you can actually go out on their website anytime and take a look at how this progressed along the way throughout the week as ballots came in. It's a lot of really interesting information about what are voters doing with these ballots in these ranked choice voting elections. The other thing that San Francisco does that is really cool, they actually release images of the ballots that were voted as a digital image and their CVRs, and that gives even more transparency and more ability to show the public exactly what's happening, exactly what voters are doing with their ballots out into the public. I will say I did try to download some of the ballots to share with you today, and the files were so incredibly large, it never would download, but certainly take a look out on the San Francisco elections page and check it out for yourself. 2 other things that San Francisco does one other thing, and then one thing they are getting ready to do, their vote by mail ballots can arrive up to 7 days after the election. And that in my mind shows dedication to making sure every voter's voice is heard and every vote gets counted. So they're still taking those in up through day 7. And then this year, San Francisco voted on a referendum to change their municipal elections to even numbered years, and it did pass. So that way they'll be running concurrently with presidential elections, which we know from statistics over the years and from historically, those are higher voter turnout years, and then they'll have higher voter turnout for their city elections as well.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Kelly, and thanks for joining us. So as mentioned earlier, my name is Ryan Kirby, Public Policy Specialist with the Resource Center, and I'll be discussing an overview of the 2022 RCV ballot measures. In 2022, there were 10 ballot measures and 8 of them won on Election Day. And we'll discuss each of them briefly, but I just wanted to show a couple of highlights here. In Portland, Oregon, we'll have big changes to its local government by expanding the council and implementing proportional ranked choice voting. Nevada voters took a big step towards statewide RCV, and proportional ranked choice voting measures passed in other jurisdictions. Okay. So starting off in Fort Collins, Colorado. Fort Collins, Colorado joins 5 other municipalities in the state that are either using or will use RCV for local offices. The measure passed with 58% support and will be used for their mayoral and council elections. And voters also approved moving local elections to the November of odd years, which lines up with their RCV implementation of 2025. In Evanston, Illinois, voters supported the RCV ballot measure by an impressive 83%. The measure also eliminated the primary for mayor, clerk, and council members, which should help the city save some time and money, with an expected implementation in 2025 as well. And as a note, Springfield, Illinois has been using RCV since 2011 for their UOCAVA voters, which are overseas and military voters, in the event they have a runoff. But Evanston will be the first jurisdiction in Illinois to use it for all of their voters. In Ojai, California, they have gone through a few changes to its local government structure in recent years. And ranked choice voting has been seen as a solution to avoid a California Voting Rights Act lawsuit. And by adopting proportional ranked choice voting, voters will still be able to vote for at-large representation and elect candidates of their choice. This measure was passed with 56% support and is expected to be used in their November 2024 elections. In Portland, Maine, they've been using RCV since 2011, and the state has been using it since 2018. The Charter Commission unanimously voted to add proportional ranked choice voting to the November ballot, which passed with 64% support from voters. And the council is now tasked with passing an ordinance to enact those changes. In Nevada, ranked choice voting passed a major hurdle where 53% of voters supported the ballot question. Ranked choice voting will be used to elect their US senators, members of Congress, statewide offices, and state legislature. The measure also opened the Pick One primary to all voters, regardless of party affiliation, with the top 5 candidates advancing to the ranked choice voting general election. So similar to what happened in Alaska, but with 5 in the ranked choice voting general election. While that measure passed this year, it will need to pass again in 2024 before it can be implemented in 2026. So keep an eye out for that. In Oregon, Portland, currently the city council includes 1 mayor and 4 commissioners that are elected citywide. And the Charter Commission proposed a number of changes, but just focusing on the election-related portions, they're going to expand the council to 12 and divide the city into 4 districts with 3 members, each elected with proportional ranked choice voting. And they will use single winner ranked choice voting for their mayor and city auditor. This measure also eliminates primaries, and it passed with 58% support. And it will actually become the biggest city in the US to use proportional ranked choice voting. Additionally, in Oregon, Multnomah County, which Portland is the largest city in Multnomah County, voters also approved ranked choice voting for county offices of county chair, commissioners, auditor, and sheriff. This measure also eliminated primaries for those offices, and it passed with 69% support and would be implemented in 2026. In the state of Washington, voters in 3 different jurisdictions had measures related to ranked choice voting. In Seattle, voters approved changing their elections for mayor, city attorney, and city council. They were also asked whether they preferred ranked choice voting or approval voting, and ranked choice voting was preferred by 76% of voters. We don't have time to dive into the differences between the two, but we'll be sure to include some of that information in the follow-up materials. I do want to note that due to state law, Seattle only approved ranked choice voting for use in primary elections. On the other hand, Washington also saw 2 RCV ballot measure losses. And as you can see, both San Juan and Clark County were voting to use RCV for county offices, but like a lot of the other proposed charter amendments for those counties, they also did not pass. So in summary, as we can see, ranked choice voting ballot measures saw a great deal of success across the country, paving the way for future implementations. Proportional ranked choice voting continues to grow across the country, and we look forward to supporting these jurisdictions during their implementations. And then speaking of implementations, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to discuss 2023.
Thanks, Ryan. One quick thing before I dive in on my portion, we did forget to mention during the implementation during Kelly's section that military and overseas voters, UOCAVA voters in Georgia, got the opportunity to cast ranked ballots this year in order to participate in runoffs. We're happy to talk a bit more about that in the Q&A if you're interested, but that's one storyline that is, I think, interesting, especially given that Georgia had such a high-profile runoff. Some voters actually got to use ranked choice to participate in that runoff already, some military overseas voters. So with that said, I am going to talk a little bit, like Ryan said, about what's going to happen in ranked choice voting in 2023. I'm going to mostly focus on places that are either implementing ranked choice voting for the first time or will be using ranked choice voting yet again. We'll also briefly touch on some ballot measures and places where you might expect ranked choice voting to get adopted. I just have this one slide, it'll be quick. So there's 36 cities scattered across 7 states that will be using ranked choice voting next year. It's all cities because odd years are, for the most part, the time when cities, when municipalities, when counties run elections to elect local officials. Very few states hold state level elections in odd years, and of course, no federal elections occur in an odd year unless there's a special election. So those 36 cities are those 7 states, are in those 7 states, which are Utah, Massachusetts, Minnesota, California, Colorado, and Virginia. And I am forgetting one of them right now. Let me double check my notes. Oh, in New York City, of course. And then as well, Burlington, Vermont will be using ranked choice voting next year. So that's where we're expecting to see it. We may also see some growth of ranked choice voting next year. We know Arlington County, Virginia is like right on the cusp of adopting ranked choice voting under a local option law that Virginia passed a couple of years ago. They'll be the first place in Virginia to use ranked choice voting for their local elections. There's other likely adoptions in Virginia, but we can't say for certain who else might be using ranked choice voting in Virginia, but there's 3 or 4 localities in the state that are also interested in running ranked choice voting. They would be using it in November. Arlington County is looking at using it in June for their primary elections. We'll also be seeing some new ranked choice voting implementations in Broomfield and Boulder, Colorado. They'll be implementing ranked choice voting for the first time next year, and as well as Amherst, Massachusetts, which will be implementing proportional ranked choice voting for the first time next year, which is really exciting to see. One other thing to highlight before I talk about ballot measures, Utah, about 24 cities in Utah will be using ranked choice voting. We may see a few more adopt ranked choice voting before their November municipal elections as well. And then on ballot measures, right now, we know of one place that's going to be using, or that will be voting on adopting ranked choice voting next year. That's Redondo Beach, California. And they actually moved to put that on the ballot essentially right after Election Day. The council got moving and put it on the ballot for this spring. And then I would say we expect a few more adoptions, whether that's legislatively with state legislatures passing laws possibly to use ranked choice voting in presidential primary contests in 2024, localities adopting it in other jurisdictions, but nowhere yet has decided to do that yet. So we're keeping an eye on that, and we'll definitely keep you all posted as more places may adopt ranked choice voting or put it on the ballot next year. So that's my portion of the presentation. We'll go to Q&A now, and if anyone does want to follow us on social media or check out our website, all of that information is on this slide. I'll leave that up for a couple minutes, and then while we get the Q&A started. Okay, let's get started with the Q&A. One question, I think this one's interesting. I'll just pose it to everybody. In instances where a single municipality was implementing ranked choice voting, what were the biggest pain points with county and state election administrators in getting that implementation up and running?
I guess I'll get the conversation started here. From what I've seen and my experiences here, especially since being with Resource Center, the biggest pain points seem to be the technology. A lot of systems that counties or jurisdictions may have already in place could either be outdated or not RCV capable. And I noticed that seems to be kind of the biggest hurdle. And this might be my own personal shout out to the software I'm responsible for, but there's RC tab, which can work with a lot of already existing systems. So, but that seems to be the one I see as the technology aspect of the whole thing. But I don't think it's impossible to implement it.
I think you kind of have to also think about the time and the resourcing of both the county and the city. We have more and more limited resources, less and less funding, and we're adding something else on top of that. And since Renee made a plug, I'll make a plug for the resources side of the Resource Center. That's one of the reasons we exist, is to help bridge that gap and to help you find things that are already being tried, trusted, used, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And we can, again, like I said, help you bridge that gap.
Yeah, I'll just add that another piece tends to be voter education. And there are a lot of resources out there, both from our organizations like Democracy Rising, to both help voters and candidates. That's definitely one area that is a change with ranked choice voting. That is something that jurisdictions would need to look at when they're looking at implementation.
Awesome. Next question I'll pose this to you, Renee, and then I'm also curious to hear from Kelly. In Alaska, how much of the implementation support occurred in civil society, e.g. Alaskans for Better Elections, versus the state government? How did these different actors, stakeholders, collaborate on ranked choice voting implementation?
For that one, I know the Alaska Board of Elections was very active in voter education. But from what I saw in some of my interactions, Alaskans for Better Elections, which seems to be the biggest group in Alaska, really seemed to help get the message out there. They were really active in learning as much as they could about ranked choice voting and getting the message out there to the public. So it was very cool to see.
Yeah, I would say, both sides of this coin did a fantastic job educating the voters. There was accurate, good information on the county, the state's website. Gail Femi and her team were, they really were on top of things. They ran it smoothly especially with the special election, under a really short timeline. They were able to do the things they needed to do to make that run smoothly. Then on the other side of that coin, and I'm speaking from working with both sides, we did some work with the Department of Division Elections, and we did some work with ABE and the other organizations working in Alaska. They really came in and did a tremendous amount of boots on the ground work. So, going to festivals, going to small towns. There was a lot of money put into educating some of the more remote areas, folks in Alaska, worked with some of the Native groups and other community groups to make sure that voters would understand and have the information they needed to vote in the Pick One primary and the ranked choice voting election.
Awesome, thanks. I'm scrolling through the questions, trying to pick another one. We've got some flowing in. It's exciting to see some good questions from people.
Yeah, we have a few questions in the chat too.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you are sending questions, please send them in the Q&A. It's hard for us to watch the chat and the Q&A at once. If you have a question, use the Q&A function. It will be easier for us to track what questions we've answered and what questions we haven't gotten to yet. One is more of a suggestion, and this is something we do, but we do need to update, is can we get a summary table of where ranked choice voting is used? We need to be able to rattle off these numbers when we meet with people. So two things here. We do have a where it's used page on our website. We do need to update it also, and we got to get a better map on there. Fairvote does also track all these numbers on their website if you're looking for that sort of information. From Gene Krebs, what was the first spring election called, but not jungle primary? There's a different name that he has not seen and liked better. Renee?
The name I saw was just a special primary election. Yeah, I haven't seen any other variation of name on that one, to be honest with you. I know that they just had a big field of candidates and they had to run it early. Yeah, special primary is what I had it referred to in my notes and what I saw it as referred to. Wish I had a better answer for that one.
It's not Pick One primary. Is that what he's looking for? Something different from that, or
Possibly.
okay?
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess the simplest thing is there may be two things you're thinking of. One, the campaign for ballot measure 2 in Alaska called this a top 4 primary system. But, you know, to talk about that, the 4 highest vote getters would go from the primary to the general. So that may be what you heard it called. But election administrators, the Division of Elections and Alaskans for Better Elections and others in Alaska found that Pick One primary was clearer communication for voters. It told the voters what they had to do in the primary so that they understood how to vote properly in the election.
Chris, I'm seeing a question here that I think you might be a good person to answer. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between single winner ranked choice voting and proportional ranked choice voting and some of the differences in implementation?
Yeah, so for the most part, you know, for election administrators, there's not a ton of difference. I think, like Kelly talked about in her presentation, the big change is in voter education, is in getting people familiar with what this new system is and how it works. Proportional ranked choice voting has a somewhat more sophisticated counting process required than single winner ranked choice voting. So explaining that to voters takes a bit more time and takes, you know, you just need a few more materials that break it down for voters. We've also heard from people that we heard from people in Portland, Oregon, in Multnomah County, where they had these proportional ranked choice voting campaigns to adopt it. We heard that having multiple ways of explaining how proportional ranked choice voting works for people, explaining like the mathy version for some people, and using more, using analogies, using different types of situations to show how proportional ranked choice voting might work. Say if you're in a school, or in like a class in school, and want to have a pizza party, and you want to select 3 pizzas for the people who are in that pizza party, having different ways of explaining it and getting people to connect with the information helps them understand it better. And I'd say that's true in a campaign as well as in a voter education context. The other thing that is valuable, or that's important to understand, is on the administrator side, is how you're actually going to run a round by round count. How are you going to determine your winners? Because for all intents and purposes, everything else is functionally the same. The way you mark the ballot is the same. The way you order your candidates may be different as a voter, but like the actual marking of the ballot is the same in single winner ranked choice voting as in proportional. And it's the same administratively when you need to centralize cast vote records, when you need to design ballots, all these technical things. The other big change is in actually producing election results. So you just need, as an election administrator, you need to make sure that you have round by round counting software that can process ranked choice voting, a proportional ranked choice voting election, according to the rules that you've adopted locally. So that is, those are the things to keep in mind. We could talk about audits and recounts, but you can also watch our last webinar if you want to hear about that and how that interacts with ranked choice voting. We've got questions flying in now. Oh my gosh. What? Oh, I think this is a good question from Greg Miller. What is your preferred resource for explaining these kinds of concepts? I assume this is any kind of ranked choice voting. We've seen several before, but is there a resource we should keep handy that we think is good to point people to?
That's a good question. I'll start looking in the future and something that we're hoping to have. So the Resource Center is working on an RCV 101 set of videos. So hopefully those will be ready early next year. And we'll be able to share that with everybody, and they can promote that, what ranked choice voting is, and hopefully just about 2-minute explainer videos. So I'll promote that.
Yeah, I don't have a preferred visual, but I know for me personally, when it came to learning about ranked choice voting and eventually, so obviously supporting it, any visualization, like a video, a chart, or, a charts really help you understand what's going on with the process, how votes are distributed and counted in the rounds. I'm a big supporter of visuals on that.
I would agree with that. And I would say the simpler the explanation, the better. Something that people can identify with, can understand. I like your example, Chris, of pizza. Choosing pizza to get proportional amounts of pizza for the people that want pepperoni or cheese, or the vegetarians or non-vegetarians, or, people that like peppers and onions. Things that really connect with them stick better, I think. And I'm not sure that's a professional educational term, but sticking with it with them is the best way to go. Simple.
Yeah, I stole that pizza party example from Democracy Rising's proportional ranked choice voting video explainer, which I think is a good one for helping people understand how it works and what it's for. This is an interesting question. Are election administrator networks and associations sufficiently bought in on ranked choice voting? What sort of outreach do we need to do, or goodwill do we need to build with election administrators around ranked choice voting? I'm curious to hear what all of you say, because we've been going to conferences all year to talk to election administrators about this sort of thing. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first this time. So I think there's definitely work to be done generally with goodwill with election administrators right now. As we know, they've been some of the most under fire people in the US over the last couple of years. And so they're feeling attacked from a lot of different ways. And then we want to bring this new thing in that they haven't maybe implemented before, or can't understand how that would work in their day-to-day processes. So, we've been spending a lot of our time over the last year, and can plan to continue doing so, going to conferences, meeting administrators where they are, listening to administrators. Melissa Hall and I went to the Alaska Municipal Clerks Conference last week in Anchorage, and the main thing we did was listen. We just asked a question. We said, what did you think of ranked choice voting? The municipal folks did not run those elections for their towns. The state ran that, and the counties were part of that. But we just listened, and we just wanted to know where they stood on it. We didn't try to convince. We didn't try to sell. And what we found out is, for the most part, they were willing to talk about it, to ask their questions. They felt comfortable doing that. And so I think, the more we can be in front of, the more we can meet the administrators where they are, the better we'll be.
And it seems that the more examples there are of jurisdictions of various sizes successfully conducting ranked choice voting elections, the more examples there are of that, the easier it is for election admins to buy in, because it's showing that it is possible to implement ranked choice voting, that it's not some monumental impossible feat that it just can't be done. No, it can be done. Especially Alaska did such a great job doing everything in such a tight timeline. When Don Young passed, they hadn't anticipated doing a ranked choice voting election until November, but everything was pushed so far forward that they were forced to deal with this. And they were successful. It wasn't the end of the world for them. And they were able to conduct an election that was, free, fair, and accurate, which is what everybody wants to do. That's the ultimate goal of an election admin, is they want to conduct a good election. And it is possible with ranked choice voting, and the more jurisdictions that do it, there are more examples to pull from.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, when you're looking at it from an advocacy perspective, one of the important things to keep in mind when you're having a conversation with your local election administrator is that in many cases they are, overworked and understaffed and underfunded. So keeping that in mind, that when you have an ask of them, try to show up beforehand and provide, if you have an army of volunteers, help here where you can. And keep in mind that also in many cases, these jurisdictions, elections are just one of many things that they do. So they are very busy. And so try to keep, any arguments or any conversations to the point, and provide the information and provide resources to them as well.
I just want to add one more thing quickly, Chris. Election administrators are people, and we talk a lot around our organization about, how do we talk to election administrators? How do we help others speak the language, understand, the nuances of what they do? And some of that's just, relationship building and being a person. And like Ryan said, offering help, offering solution-based suggestions, and making sure that, you're building that relationship, and we can help with that. We can, do some training with you on how to talk to election administrators, and we can provide some information along those lines. So, just making sure that you have that relationship in place is really critical.
All great points. It is, we've heard again and again from election administrators that, they want to be consulted. And it helps to bring them in to the process early and build a trusting relationship for if and when you do pass ranked choice voting. On that note, there's two questions that I'm seeing that I think are sort of like interesting and related here. Let me find them again. Give me 1 second.
While you're looking, Chris, I will answer one question here. Can you speak to the issue of election integrity and open source software versus proprietary software? RCTab is an open source software tabulation tool. And when it comes to things like tabulation and even to a lesser extent ballot design, most of those systems are typically non-network systems. I don't really have any sort of fear about election integrity when it comes to open source versus proprietary, because open source is open for everybody to see and visualize, but at the same time, those systems aren't networked. They're isolated, they stand on their own, they process everything on their own. So I'm not too concerned. In fact, I prefer open source in some instances over proprietary, because when it comes to a proprietary system, you're just given a black box where you don't understand what's going on. You don't understand the processes or the mechanics of what the software is doing when it's running in the background. But that's just my 2 cents. I thought I could answer that one fairly quickly.
Yeah, great. So the question I was looking for are, one, where does the strongest opposition to ranked choice voting tend to come from? And two, from Aaron Grossman in Minneapolis, has there been any research into the factors that contribute to jurisdictions enacting ranked choice voting and those that voted down? Is it something to do with demographics, with local organizing and local politics, what elected officials are saying, familiarity with ranked choice voting? What are the things that we're seeing out there that may or may not contribute to a ranked choice voting campaign winning or losing?
As somebody from Washington State, when I think about the two that lost here in Washington, I think a lot of it has to do with just the familiarity with ranked choice voting. Those two regions of Washington are not exactly the biggest population. So I just think the fact that people aren't really sure what it is, you know, they hear about things like maybe they hear about long wait for results, things like that. I think people just are not familiar enough in certain areas to accept ranked choice voting at this time. I don't think it's impossible. I don't have an official report, but that's what I believe, is that people just aren't familiar with what it is and how it is actually, I think, a better way to vote.
Yeah.
I think also sometimes, regardless of what party or what group of people are in charge, if there's a large proportion of one group in charge and they feel like it's going to change the election outcomes in a way that does not benefit them, I think that can be, might even not be that RCV isn't good for that community. It might be perfect for that community, but there may be some opposition organized by folks that don't really want the way they're electing people to change, or the makeup of who they're electing to change, for sure. And just to speak to something that Renee said, people grab on to negative things a whole lot quicker than they do positive things. So if they hear, oh, there's a long wait for tabulation for ranked choice voting, whether it's true or not, you have people really kind of picking up that juicy bit of gossip, so to speak. And that can also be, detrimental.
Okay. I'm going to find two more questions, then I think this is the last pair of questions we can do. So part one is, does ranked choice voting need a primary in addition to a general? Like, is it necessary for you to have both a ranked choice voting primary election or pick one primary, like in Alaska, and ranked choice voting in the general, or can you combine those things? And what are the usual characteristics of communities that adopt and end up liking and sticking with ranked choice voting?
Well, I can take
Ryan. Yeah, I was going to say, you take the first one.
So I can take the part of the first one. So as I talked about in some of my ballot measures piece, there's some jurisdictions that actually eliminated their primary and are just using ranked choice voting. And that can be done because you're going to have all of the candidates run against each other. And with the ranking, everybody can provide their first, second, third, however many choices. So it's not necessary. There's some jurisdictions that want to continue to use a primary. So like we saw in Alaska and what might happen in Nevada, that they want to have a pick 4 or pick 5. So that runs just like a normal primary. You vote for one in your party or open primary. And so they still run against each other. So it's not necessary. It's up to your jurisdiction. And if they're looking to get rid of a primary and save costs there or save time, then that's an option. But there are some jurisdictions that still want to keep it.
And I think there's also the technical limitation. When state laws are put into place, they usually get feedback from election admins. Sometimes systems, like HART, they can only handle up to 6 rankings for ranked choice voting. So sometimes you can't have more than 6 candidates. So you'll need a primary to whittle down that. It just depends. I think I don't think I can pin it down to any one thing or why you would need a primary or not need a primary, but I think it's basically a case-by-case basis on this.
Okay, well, we are just about out of time. Before we go, I wanted to actually remind folks, Fair Vote, who has come up a few times in this presentation, has a webinar today at 4 as well. They'll be talking about the political things that were happening to make ranked choice voting happen this year. We wanted to talk about, what we saw, what we learned from these implementations, how things went, and where we're expecting things to go next year. Fair Vote will be talking about essentially the political narrative. What's the story that was told in these places to get them to adopt ranked choice voting in the first place? What worked? What might change? So if you want to learn more about those sorts of strategic questions and really dig in on where ranked choice voting might be going next, especially in 23 and 24, tune in to that. With that, any other final words from folks on the panel?
I'm just excited to see, the growth of ranked choice voting. It feels like we're at one of those moments in time where we're going to look back and say, wow, if we had only known at that moment that things were happening at this rate, and we want to make sure that we're geared up to help jurisdictions make this process as smoothly as possible. Because sometimes when the ball gets rolling, it's like the avalanche, the snowball gets bigger and bigger. And that's why we're here. And we're here to help with that implementation side of things, and want to be there as much as we can for you.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in and spending an hour of your Wednesday afternoon with us. Happy holidays, and we'll see you all in the new year.